Welcome to GVN's Talking Comics Interview. On today's show, we welcome psychologist and author Dr. Travis Langley. Dr. Langley is the author of the book, Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night, coming on March 1st with its second edition. Now, here's your host, Martin Sexton.
Welcome once again to another edition of GVN's Talking Comics Interview. I am your host, Martin, and today we're going to delve into the psychology of the Caped Crusader, the world's greatest detective, the Dark Knight himself, Batman. And who better to do that with than the man who basically wrote the book on what makes the Batman tick, Dr. Travis Langley. His book, Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night, has been entertaining and informing readers for over 10 years. And coming March 1st, he'll be bringing out the second edition of his book. So let's welcome Dr. Travis Langley to GVN's Talking Comics Interview. How are we doing today, Travis?
All right. Thank you for having me here.
All right. Appreciate it. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of background. So, as a psychologist, what made you decide to delve into the enigma that is Batman?
Well, if you're going to talk about the psychology of a superhero and his enemies, you start with Batman. Yes, when I took an interest in Batman, I don't remember. My baby book genuinely shows on 2 different pages that Batman was one of my earliest words. So I've always loved Batman. And when the idea came to me in 2007, it was because I had been teaching a psychology and literature course. The person who used to teach it had retired. So I had all the students analyze different characters in different ways. And to show them how to do the work, I did the assignments myself with Batman as the example. I didn't always show them what I was doing because it was more than I wanted them to inflict on me, more than I wanted them to do. But I also went to the Comics Arts Conference, a scholarly conference within San Diego Comic-Con for the first time that year. And I thought, I want to be part of this. I need to take these things I've been doing and write an article about Batman. Within a year, I had so many ideas. I need to write a book about Batman. It has remained popular for a decade. That's why we've got a second edition coming out.
Right. And I having read through it, I can see why, because he's a fascinating character anyway. And of course, probably the one thing that makes him, especially for someone who's studying the psychology of him, as unlike us who has a sort of a finite story, his story is continually going on. New creators are adding new things to him, which actually is one of the. How did you decide how to kind of narrow it down? Because you got over 80 years worth of stories to delve through.
Yeah, that was why Chapter 2 is titled "Which Batman?"
Right.
A lot of people ask that. Some of it you have to look at historical context. It reflects how things have changed over the years, and you look at them and you see what's common across them all. He is someone who has decided that he can and should fight crime dressed like a bat. He is a man who saw his parents murdered before his eyes. Even some more lighthearted versions, such as Batman the Brave and the Bold and the Adam West TV series, refer to that. In fact, it was the second line out of Adam's mouth in the first episode, and he mentioned it again later. Although he did it in their melodramatic way. Each time he said, "When dastardly criminals killed my parents."
Right.
And so we've got this character who works on so many different levels. Frank Miller and Brian Bendis said he's the only character who can work at absolutely any level, from the silliest children's story to adventure to detective story to horror. I would argue that the Joker also fits those criteria, but that's because of how he reflects and distorts Batman himself. And this is someone that he flips the coin on Superman. When you learn that no godlike person is going to fly out of the clouds to help you, and when you're in the darkest, worst trouble, maybe one of the hoodlums in the environment will help you. Maybe somebody will step out of the dark. If you're in a biker bar, if one of the bikers will tell the other guys, "I'll leave him alone, he's okay." And that's the kind of thing we know. Okay, this can happen. Somebody dark can stick up for other people. And that's, of course, Batman's more attractive than some of the examples I was just referring to there. But he part of him is he's the part of us that wants to frighten life's bullies away. He is also the part of us that wants somebody to step up for us, and the part that wants adventure and so many different things. So usually when talking, I'll try to talk about Batman as usually written. Sometimes for certain issues, I have to go through to specific versions, such as PTSD. In the trauma chapter, I go through symptoms of PTSD, and Batman definitely has certain symptoms of that. As usually written, he does not quite have enough symptoms to fully qualify for PTSD, but certain versions do. Uh, and certain points in his story he does, such as right after the second Robin died, he definitely was not functioning well by his own standards, and he did meet full criteria for PTSD.
Okay, and that's always it's something actually that Neil Adams said in one of the last Comic Cons I got to go to. He says that as writers with Batman, you can do pretty much anything you want to do with Batman, but you got to put him back the way you found him when you're done.
That's true.
So I know you said that you went to the Comic Cons. Did you ever feel intimidated by talking to these people who basically made their lives working and creating on Batman, or did you ever feel like maybe they were intimidated by you because I have a learned psychologist here? We might be psychoanalyzing me while we're talking about Batman.
Actually, both happen. Not too much on the intimidation. I'm not generally intimidated by people. Also, I met my biggest idols early on. It's in my third San Diego Comic Con. I did a convention panel with Adam West, Jerry Robinson, creator of the Joker, Michael Uslan, producer of the movies, and they all. Adam did it mainly, I think, because he had never met Jerry or Michael before, and he wanted to. And Michael Uslan, producer of the movies, who has become a good friend of mine since then. He said it had to happen, and so I had that early on. I had some conversations with Stan Lee early on. Of course, I was very self-conscious when speaking to Stan, but then after that took us. Before that, which admittedly not a long span. People say, who would you like to meet at these conventions? Well, I would like to meet Stan Lee and Batman's creators are dead. But meeting Jerry Robinson was close.
Yeah.
And I'll sometimes mention Adam West in those. So it'd be the three. And I did that early on. Neil, it was a little while before I talked to Neil. I kept wanting to go up to Neil and tell him that his art inspired me to learn to read when I was in preschool, because he made the stories look so much darker and more mysterious than the cartoon or the old cartoon or the Adam West TV show had led me to believe. When I finally said this to him, of course, Neil said, 1,000 people have told me that. Now, the other part of what you asked about people intimidated by us, yeah, actually there are. There are people who are intimidated by the scholars, especially 10 years ago they were. I don't think that's as much an issue now because there's been so much more of it and so many more interactions. But yeah, there are writers and artists who are intimidated by the scholars. There's one very well-known person who I'm not going to name, but there are people who repeatedly tried to arrange for the two of us to do an event together, and some of them said, yeah, he is definitely intimidated by psychologists. That's not most. I told Lynn Ween about that one time, and Lynn said, really? I'm not intimidated by anybody. I was like, well, that's part of what I like about you, Lynn.
I said, I was curious because me, I'd probably fall in that category as saying, I'm afraid to say anything. Okay, so and of course, the one thing about Batman, of course, is that he has no powers. I mean, he's basically getting by on his training and his intellect. And I've always thought that was, I admire the guys who go into crime fighting basically just on courage, almost courage alone. But I always wonder, is there a point where courage intersects with foolish and it might be considered that what are you, crazy?
It definitely can, and Batman knows there's something crazy about what he's doing. That's part of what shows that, well, he's not psychotic, because he knows he's doing a crazy seeming thing in order to shake up the system that he's dealing with. There you go. It's like, who wears a mask? Well, there are times in world history when people need to wear a mask. Who takes the law into their own hands? Well, if you're in some of the out of some countries, say, or times in history when all the authorities are corrupt, what do you have to do? And it can be a very difficult situation. So it really depends on creating a climate in which it makes sense. And back when the comics first started, the police were not doing well against the gangsters of the time. Now, over the years, it got a bit sillier because it was a bit harder to justify these people still running around in those costumes. But in the 80s, Frank Miller established that Gotham had the most corrupt police force in the world, or in the country anyway, and the most corruption at every level of authority. And in doing so, he created an environment in which Batman could make some sense.
Another thing, you mentioned actually Gotham. Gotham, does it play a part in how Batman, as you said, because it has a reputation for crime, and even in Court of Owl's book, they basically made it Gotham a major part in it, because basically they were saying that Bruce or Batman thought they knew Gotham better than anybody, and come to find out he didn't know it as well as he thought he did.
Yeah, his relationship with Gotham is extremely important. Of course, in the comics right now, they're sending him out of Gotham for a while. And he can have adventures elsewhere. Usually when he's teamed up with other superheroes, he can go other places. But until Denny O'Neil was writing in the 50s and 60s, Batman was more likely to go to another planet than to leave town unless he was with the Justice League. It is very much about, this is a man who is trying to defend his city. And you could argue this is the city that killed his parents. This is the city that did such destruction, but it's also the city that his family has loved for many generations. It is the city that he feels very protective of. And that relationship is very important for making sense of, how can a guy do this?
Okay, so I mean, you did a nice job of kind of covering a good part of Batman's rogue gallery. And if you had to put them in a category, do you think there's any certain theme that is common amongst all of, or that you maybe the ones you covered, of Batman's rogues gallery of villains?
A theme? Halloween. Halloween is a theme across his villains. Halloween with its scary figures, its costumes, its puzzles and mysteries. One way or another, across his enemies, they can fit these things. You might want to argue a couple. It's like, well, they still have costumes. Poison Ivy originally was not somebody with superpowers. She was somebody with her poison ivy costume who was an eco-terrorist and doing something different. And Ra's al Ghul, some sources will say Ra's al Ghul, Denny O'Neil, and Batman the Animated Series say Ra's al Ghul. So when in doubt, go with Batman the Animated Series. But Al Ghul, he's different. With him, essentially, Denny was introducing a Bond villain into the Batman stories. So he's an unusual one in that regard. And it's amazing that he has held up, as such an important part of Batman's rogues gallery over the years. But outside him, Halloween is the one thing you could look at for the theme across those who've really stood the test of time.
And of course, my favorite has always been the Joker. And his relationship with Batman is all got all kinds of complicated. And I thought it was interesting as I was preparing to talk. I was looking back. Like in the Lego Batman, Zach Galifianakis' version of Joker basically was upset because Batman didn't consider him his number one villain. And it basically kind of hurt his feelings. And in The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger's Joker, Batman's want to know why he was wanting to kill him. So I don't want to kill you. So I need you. You complete me. And of course, even Mark Hamill's Joker in the animated series was upset when appeared like a Joe Schmo had killed Batman. Said that's not what's supposed to happen. I don't even think he really wanted to kill him. But if somebody was going to kill him, he wanted to do it, and he didn't want some guy off the street doing it. So they had a really weird connection, and I'm surprised you could write probably a whole book just on Joker.
The Joker psychology: evil clowns and the women who love them.
Well, see, now had I okay, so you did write it away. So, well,
it's gonna look like that was a setup, but I guarantee y'all out there it was not.
Okay,
No,
so
that is the one that people had asked me more over the years than anything else. I mean, I've had a dozen books since Batman, and people would ask, "Are you going to do on Supernatural? Are you going to cover Game of Thrones?" And we've done those. But the one people had asked me about more than anything else was if I was going to do a book on the Joker. And for a while, part of my thought on that was, well, obviously we can easily fill a book, easily. But I felt like something was missing because you don't know for sure what's going on inside the Joker's head. And finally, when the publicist from the publisher said, "Why don't you make it about the Joker and Harley?" I was like, well, yeah, even if it's mostly about the Joker, if we give Harley some substantial attention in there somewhere, that does give us something that's more grounded. That does give us, we do know more about what goes on with Harley and her motivations and wishes and desires. And we can even end the book with something a little more upbeat, because the last chapter is about therapy, different types of therapy. And I've got 10 different therapists weighing in on, it's like, with this type of therapy, help the Joker? No. With that one? No. With that one would make him worse. But if Harley's ready to progress and want somebody to talk to, and maybe getting social support from the most meaningful people in her life, there are some that could help her.
I'm not really surprised that you did tackle a little bit about does Batman kill people?
Actually, I have to in the second edition.
Uh,
in the second edition, which comes out in March, I've got a whole chapter on that.
Okay, so you didn't cover that in the first edition then?
No, but in the past decade, mainly because of the Affleck version, people have really gotten to discussing that. So in the second edition, there are in the Which Batman chapter, I get into some of the newer versions. Like I'll talk about the Affleck version. I'll refer to the Kevin Conroy live action version from Crisis on Infinite Earths on the CW. The Lego Batman, which is Lego Batman movie, is one of the best character studies ever of this character, surprisingly. And I had to make room. I took out the humor chapter, but I'd covered enough of that material in the Joker book. It's more like it moved from one book to another. So 2 new chapters. One is about Batman's views on killing and guns, and the other one is about Batman's power to inspire people. First, characters within his own world and people within our world. How people may find this character something that helps them find motivation to get through challenges. Paul Dini, a writer from Batman the Animated Series and comics, he was mugged once upon a time and brutally injured, and it was years of recovery, and it was very hard, and he was having trouble. He was thinking, how can I write about this character who saves people when nobody stepped up to save me? But he got to having mental conversations with superheroes. And one that really stood out was Batman became his mental drill sergeant to tell him to get up and find strength and keep going.
That's pretty much what I got. But before I let you go, okay, like I said, apparently you've written about the Joker, you've written about Batman. Have you considered? And apparently people are asking.
Yes, about whatever
this.
It is. Yes.
But okay, so as far as like I said, I always found Ben Grimm from the Fantastic Four to be an interesting character. Is there a character that you haven't done that you would consider delving into?
I've got a list, and I've got a priority list. In fact, I was talking with the acquisition editor at my publisher yesterday, because while we weren't putting new books out during lockdown, so we haven't had new ones since the Joker book. Now we're working on one right now for a Stranger Netflix series. Some people will figure that one out easily enough. And they was asking, what are we? So I was saying, here are the ones that the people who contribute to the anthologies really want to write about. Here's one I really want to write about. And we had specific things that are coming up in the next 2 years in terms of medium, why those would be good ones. And then there are ones that I want to get to sometime. It's a matter of working together with a publisher, decide when is the right time to do a book on Superman. When is the right time to do a book on Spider-Man? The right time to do a book on Spider-Man would have been a couple months ago. But that was the work would have been during that period when we weren't working on them. I would love to have had my Spider-Man book out right before No Way Home.
That would have. So of course, again said that. So are we going to see one?
One thing I do is until the publisher announces them, I don't say for sure what I'm working on, because one is simply that what if there were a couple of times that we were planning certain books that we wound up not being able to do for different reasons, and what if you told somebody we were working on these and then you find, oh, we can't do this. It's I'll give you one example. We were going to do a book on Harry Potter. And as I see now, there had been somebody else did a book on the psychology of Harry Potter back in 2006, 2007. The psychology of Harry Potter, an unauthorized examination of the boy who lived, but it didn't cover it all. It came out before it all ended, so before the last book and before before many of the movies, and of course then we've got sequels and so forth. So there's plenty to talk about, and we've got a whole lot of controversy that we can fit in there now. So we have things we could talk about that weren't there, and we'd agreed to do it. We were drafting papers, and there was a reason we couldn't do it. For completely unrelated to us. It had, how far do I go with this? Oh, whatever. It's the publisher. Well, actually, you don't know which publisher I'm talking about. So
no, I do. Good.
That publisher and Rolling's publisher had been threatening to sue each other over something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with that. That had nothing to do with us. And from what I understand, J.K. Rowling likes it when people put out books analyzing her material. But because of that issue between the two publishers, that contract, we could never do the Harry Potter book.
At least that makes sense.
At least not with them.
Right. So like you said, the second edition of your book is coming out, and that is coming out, I believe, March 1st.
March 1st, yes.
Yeah. So where can our followers go to pick up that copy?
Amazon. It'll be on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all over the place. You can get it through the Turner Publishing website. It's wherever fine books are sold.
That's my line. That's what I was. You'll go find it wherever fine books are sold. Okay, so of course the Batman comes out March 4th. Well, no.
Yes, and that is not a coincidence.
Right. I think not. Okay, so do you have any? Do you have any idea of what you kind of would hope to see in the new Batman?
I want to see a smarter Batman. The movies have not generally made him as smart as he is in the comics. And I even know my friend Michael Uslan, producer of the movies, he has said publicly numerous times that he wants to see a film version in which the director and scriptwriters make Batman smarter. And from what I gather, I think we are going to see a smarter Batman this time.
But that was always the idea that I got, because they said they were going to, emphasize, the world's greatest detective part. Mm-hmm. So I would hope that it would kind of emphasize his intellect in this particular movie, even though it's, there'll of course be plenty, and I've seen some of the trailers where he beats the crap out of people, so there'll be plenty of that.
They also he's struggling with his own anger. And it is in there that he is trying to figure out how to contain himself and how to make sure he does not go over the edge.
Thanks, because I've been looking forward to it, so we don't have that much further to wait. Well, I appreciate it, Travis, and we will, of course, be following the book quite closely. And any other books that come out, I'm going to go pick up the Joker book because I didn't realize that was even a thing. So that should be fascinating. And I appreciate your time.
Sure, thanks. This has been fun.
All right, we'll talk to you again real soon, hopefully.
All righty.
All right.
Thank you for listening to GVN's Talking Comics. Please come back again. Talking Comics is a production of Geek Vibes Nation.